So hello everyone. So today my video is on lateral ventricle. So today I am going to do the video on lateral ventricle. So how many ventricles are there in our brain? There are two ventricles. Two lateral ventricles are there. Four ventricles are there in total. One is third ventricle, one is fourth ventricle, and two lateral ventricles are there. So what you are seeing, a cross section of the ventricle in sagittal plane. Now there are two ventricles and they are roughly C-shaped. So as you can see, they are roughly C-shaped because a little bit extension is there to the posterior pole. So this is how our cerebrum looks, and this is the anterior part, this is the posterior part, and this is where in the middle is where the lateral ventricle is there. Lateral ventricle is filled with CSF. CSF, and you need to remember this one more point is that the CSF which is formed, which is produced, it is formed from the choroid plexus of lateral ventricle mostly. The mostly 50% is formed from the choroid plexus of lateral ventricle. So now I am going to tell you the lateral ventricle parts. This all you are saying is fourth ventricle, and this is the tracing of cerebral fluid. This is the anterior horn of lateral ventricle. What is this? This is the anterior horn of lateral ventricle. This is the central or body part of the lateral ventricle. This is the posterior horn of lateral ventricle. This is the inferior horn of lateral ventricle. So these are the parts. These are the parts: anterior, posterior, inferior, and central, and the body. And then the place where the central, posterior, and the inferior meet, they form a collateral trigone. Now wait a second. So the main parts of the lateral ventricles are separated from each other by a septum. That septum is called septum pellucidum. So the main parts are separated from each other by a septum, that is called septum pellucidum, and CSF inside the CNS is produced by the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle. So the choroid plexus of the lateral ventricle produces the CSF. Now there are four parts, as I have told: central for the body, anterior horn, posterior horn, and inferior horn. Now we are going to learn the extent of these parts. The central part extends into the parietal lobe. It lies mostly within the parietal lobe, and it begins from the inferior interventricular foramen to the splenium of corpus callosum. So as you can see here, this is the part where interventricular foramen is there. Interventricular foramen. It connects the third ventricle. This is the third ventricle, this is the fourth ventricle, this is cerebral aqueduct, and these both connect. Lateral ventricle is connected to the third ventricle. That part is the interventricular foramen. So from the interventricular foramen till the splenium of corpus callosum, it is central part of the lateral ventricle. Now comes the anterior horn. Anterior horn lies in the frontal lobe, in front of the interventricular foramen. And then comes the posterior horn, which is the backward extension. As you can see, this is the backward extension towards the occipital lobe. Then comes the inferior horn, which lies towards the temporal lobe, 2.5 centimeter away from the temporal pole. So now you can read this: lies mostly in the parietal lobe, from the interventricular foramen to the splenium of corpus callosum. It is seen in the frontal lobe, in front of the interventricular foramen. It is seen in the backward extension towards the occipital lobe. This is the largest. Inferior horn is the largest of all of them, and this of the three horn, and extends into the temporal lobe, which lies 2.5 centimeter behind the temporal pole. And in the next I will be dealing with each of the parts in detail.